Hi everyone, how are you? I hope you're alright. If it's the first time you're going to see me here, I'm Clara, I'm the owner of the Ink Path, and here I talk about books and literature and all the things related to bookish stuff that I like. Of course, I leave all my social media and all that stuff down below, as well as my Amazon wishlist, because today I want to bring you a very special review that I've been kind of hoping to film in the past, I don't know, 2 months or so. Here we are going to talk about the new Rutkoski's book, which is called The Midnight Lie. Stay with me. In The Midnight Lie, Rutkoski comes back to the world of the Winner's Trilogy. This is a previous trilogy that Mary wrote a few years ago, and that it's very dear in the YA sphere. Actually, it's one of my favorite trilogies of all time. And this new book is actually going to be a duology, I believe, and is set 20 years or so after the events of the last installment in that trilogy that I mentioned before. This is important because this is not a continuation, this is not a sequel, this is not a new trilogy, it's more of a spin-off that is set in the same world. It refers to certain events that happen in the first trilogy, but it's not compulsory to know the whole previous trilogy to enjoy this book. If you have read it, you have more kind of background to that, and I think it's best if you do so, if you read first the original trilogy and then go to this, but it's not compulsory to know what happened, mainly because it's very well summarized in certain aspects of this story. This is the story of Nirim. It's a character who lives in a very small island that does seem to be very isolated of the world, because not a lot of travelers come around. And in this little island there's a lot of rules. There are people who have to follow certain rules because the society is divided in, let's say, different kind of classes, different kind of social classes, and depending in which class you belong to, which Keith I think it's called, you are allowed to live in a certain area of the city, you are allowed to eat certain food, or you are not allowed to wear certain clothing. There are codes of clothing depending on which kind of social status or social kind of type of people you belong to. This is important because our protagonist is from the lower kind of gifts of this society. This means that she lives in a kind of enclosed or walled area of the city where a lot of people live there, and there are certain rules regarding what they can and can't do, and she is quite content with her life at the beginning of the story. However, things change a little bit when, because of event, and Nirim ends up in prison for a time, and she meets a stranger in the prison, and her life basically turns upside down. Here we have a very interesting couple of characters, Nirim and this stranger, and I love the dynamic between the two because they belong to different worlds. this stranger is a traveler. So this is something new to Nirrim, because as I said before, there are no travelers in this island. No people arrive. No new people arrive. So when they meet, things start getting more kind of interesting than before, and they decide to go on a quest to understand the kind of doings of the city and how how the legends may be real, because this traveler has heard a legend that this island has. The first thing I want to say, and it's a very high praise to this story and also to Marie, is that this beginning of the duology is way more mature. I almost feel like it's almost in the bridge between YA and adult. And I say this because the complexity of the story, the layers that this story has, even though at the beginning of the story you feel like this story is going to be very simple or very kind of easy, is not easy at all. I also feel like it's a very mature story in the sense that it's more violent and raw at some times. Not all the time, of course, but I have this feeling that it's darker than the Winner's Trilogy was, even though knowing that the Winner's Trilogy had like this kind of darker scenes that I wasn't expecting. This is linked to the ambience and the kind of world building, that's the word, that Marie Rutkoski develops. I believe there's more work of developing a world building, more even than in the previous trilogy, which I adore the world building. I used to love the kind of rules and the games and the kind of political intrigues, but this is a whole new matter. This is a smaller area of territory with more complicated rules and with more complicated kind of background story that you are not aware of, that our character is not aware of, and that you slowly see through Nirrim's eyes. And I believe that there's beauty in that complexity, and how Marie is able to develop it in a way that you don't have all the pieces until the very end, and by the time you manage to do all the pieces, you need desperately the second installment. You need to know what's going to happen next, now that you know the truth. The way Marie Rutkoski develops the world building, it's quite kind of, it's masterful. I believe she tried new techniques that I'm not aware of, or not aware of. She tried new techniques that I never seen her use before, in a way that you are never sure about what's delivering to you until the very end. That's very interesting, because you are able to see a piece of the world you knew from before, from the original trilogy, under a more kind of whimsical light. And that's very interesting, because I believe Marie Rutkoski's lyrical and emotional style combines very well with the techniques that she has developed to create this world building. Having said that, I am going to analyze mainly our main character. Nirrim, it's a young girl who is quite content, as I said before, with the idea of having a very kind of tidy life. She doesn't need kind of adventure, until she meets the stranger. And I say this because you start discovering the world with her. You read this little island world through her eyes. I love how she starts being quite naive, obedient, and so on, and she starts questioning everything and thinking for herself, even though that's quite risky. But she managed to understand certain areas of her own personality that she quite silenced before, and I love her for that. I love how she grows through the whole novel. In fact, I love, apart from her interactions with the stranger, I love how she interacts with a kind of side character called Raven. In the same sense, when Nirim meets the stranger, they develop quite interaction, a relationship that it's very, very funny and interesting to see. They have this kind of bantering, testing each other all the way to guessing and learning from each other, and I think that's really, really nice. However, I feel something very striking about her character, even though I really like her, is that through the majority of the novel, I wasn't sure about how she was going to grow out of her own old habits, because I had the feeling that she was learning and defending herself from the world and questioning the world, but also at the same time she tried to grow a little bit. She had, in the same chapter, she had scenes or moments in which she grow back. Again, she retreated, and I understand why that happens. I promise it has a meaning in the story. It has a motive to these second-guessing attempts. But there were times in which I was like, come on, Nirim, you already went through this. We don't have to go back to the old ways. However, she is constantly balancing between what she wants to do and what's expected of her. These kind of going back several times put me a little bit not in against her, but I was quite hoping for a kind of, I was hoping for her to revel, to be content when she did what she wanted, instead of thinking back and getting scared. Again, these actions are justified. This second guessing is justified. The next part of the review that I want to highlight is the pacing. This is my major issue with this book. The pacing of the book is quite slow at the beginning, but it escalates from the beginning of the story up to the end. However, my issue with the pacing is not how progresses, because I believe that through having a slow-paced story driven by a character like Nirim gives you room to understand how Nirims behave and how the world works. But my problem with the pacing in this case is that for a while I didn't know what the aim of Nirim, what the aim of the whole plot was about. And even though I was enjoying understanding the world and knowing the characters and getting attached to characters like Nirim, despite the issues that I talked to you before, I was not quite sure about the kind of objective of the plot. However, once there are a few clues and discoveries done along the way, the pacing catches up and you are not able to put it down, mostly from the halfway point to the end. I want to chat a little bit about the hints of the original trilogy that we got. I was not expecting what I got. We have several hints of the characters that were main characters in the original trilogy. And seeing them so many years after the events of the last book, seeing them not in person because they are not appearing in this story, seeing them being talked by other characters from others' point of view, made me feel a little bit sad, because somehow I don't know how they grow up to be these mature characters. However, I feel like, especially in the case of the main character of the original trilogy, I was not expecting her to grow up to be like she is described in the story, in this new story. And that made me feel sad, very sad, because the main character in the original Winners trilogy was like my daughter. I was very attached to her, and I had a little bit of an issue knowing what now I know. And I was very sad because I was not expecting that kind of character traits from her regarding the characters that recall her or talk about her now. Having said that, even though it made me a little bit sad, I want to know, and I hope Mary is able to show us a little bit of that, even though if it's through other people talking about these original characters from the Winners trilogy. I hope that I get to understand why they changed in the way they did. Lastly, I want to explain a little bit that through the whole novel, Marie Rutkoski, despite all the issues I mentioned, and despite my bittersweet recall of certain characters, I want to say that Marie Rutkoski has managed to create something completely new, create something I was not expecting at all, go back to certain elements from the original trilogy that are not kind of present here, but somehow they are. And I want to praise Marie Rutkoski for still maintaining her poetical and lyrical and sensorial way of writing, because for me, using the different senses, even though you are explaining not the clothing or not the parties or the society or stuff like that, using the emotions in a kind of sensorial way, which is something that Marie has mastered in this story, and she did it before. It makes you place a physical image of feelings like longing, love, desire, fear. I don't know, the way she deals with emotions, and emotions specifically in characters' interactions or character background, it's quite whimsical and magical. I love how she managed to make you empathize with these characters, make you feel so much, and then she leaves you in a situation completely new. I never read anything like the ending of that book, and now I am longing to know the next part of the story, mainly because I cannot leave the characters like they are now. This is a story that has a LGBTQ plus romance, something that I haven't read from kind of a fantasy book lately, and I think it's very well developed. I love how Marie is able to develop romances in a very slow, tiny gestures romance. We are not talking about big scenes of declarations. No, I'm talking about small touches, kind of little presents and stuff like that. I love that there's an LGBTQ plus representation in here. I love that the main interest and love story is an LGBTQ plus story, mainly because why not? I mean, love is love, and it doesn't matter who is the main interest if the love is mutual and consensual, which is very important because there's a certain scene in which consent is treated, and it's lovely that it's treated like that. And I haven't seen so many explicit consensual scenes in which one character knows that the other maybe is not in the best position to start a relationship or something more physical, and they stop because they don't want the things to be like this. They want to be fully aware of the other person's needs and feelings, and it's important. Consent is very important in literature too. So with all of this, I want to say that I believe that Marie Rutkoski's comeback and returning to the Winner's Trilogy world is very good. I enjoy the story, even though I see or I feel like there were elements that I was a little bit not quite sure about. The ending is absolutely amazing, and I want to continue reading it, and I hope the sequel lives up to it. I don't know, I really like Marie writing. I really like the story, and I give it 3 stars out of 5. But of course, I will be continuing reading whatever Marie bring us to the Midnight Light world or other stories, because her prose is magnificent. See you next week, okay? If you have read the Midnight Light by now, please tell me your opinion of the book in the comment section down below. Without the spoilers, just in case someone passes by. We don't want to ruin the experience, right? Bye!